Welcome to Part 6 of Murderous Lies. Visit brooksaudiobooks.com for an awesome collection of unique, full-length audiobooks. And be sure to subscribe to be notified when new books are released. Chapter 21. Sartorial Revelations. Wednesday, May 19, 5:30 p.m. The housekeeper watched us with noticeable unease that afternoon. Despite her robust stature, there was a weariness about her, and her face betrayed the stress of ongoing tension. Snitkin, as we entered, informed us that she had diligently followed every newspaper update on the case, and had questioned him relentlessly on the details. She stepped into the living room with hardly a nod to acknowledge our presence, settling into the chair Quentin offered, as if preparing herself for a dreaded examination. When Quentin studied her intently, she shot him a frightened glance, and quickly averted her gaze, as if their brief eye contact had revealed a hidden truth she had been guarding closely. Without any preamble, Quentin launched into his inquiries. Mrs. Platts, was Mr. Clark particular about his toupee? Did he often entertain guests without it? The woman seemed to relax a bit. Oh no, sir, never. Think carefully, Mrs. Platts. Has Mr. Clark ever been in anyone's company without his toupee, to your knowledge? She fell silent for a moment, her brows knitting together in thought. Once I saw him take off his wig and show it to Colonel Driscoll, a gentleman who used to visit frequently. But Colonel Driscoll was an old friend. He told me they had lived together once. No one else. Again, she frowned in concentration. No, she replied, after a few long minutes. What about the tradespeople? He was very particular about them, and strangers too, she added. During hot weather, when he would sit in here without his wig, he always pulled the shade on that window. She pointed to the window nearest the hallway. People can see in from the steps. I'm glad you mentioned that, Quentin said. And anyone standing on the steps could easily tap on the window or the iron bars to get the attention of someone in this room. Oh, yes, sir, easily. I once did it myself, when I ran an errand and forgot my key. Do you think it's possible that whoever shot Mr. Clark got in that way? Yes, sir. She seized the idea eagerly. That person would have had to know Mr. Clark well enough to tap on the window rather than ring the bell. Wouldn't you agree, Mrs. Platts? Yes, sir. Her tone was uncertain. She clearly found the point somewhat confusing. If a stranger had tapped on the window, would Mr. Clark have let him in without his toupee? Oh, no. He wouldn't have allowed a stranger inside. Are you sure the bell didn't ring that night? Absolutely, sir. Her reply was firm. Is there a light on the front steps? No, sir. If Mr. Clark had looked out the window to see who was tapping, could he have recognized the person at night? She hesitated. I don't know. I don't think he could. Is there any way to see who's outside through the front door without opening it? No, sir. Sometimes I wish there was. So, if the person knocked on the window, Mr. Clark must have recognized their voice. It seems that way, sir. And you're certain no one could get in without a key? How could they? The door locks by itself. It has a standard spring lock, doesn't it? Yes, sir. Then it must have a catch that allows the door to open from either side, even if it's latched. It used to have a catch like that, she explained, but Mr. Clark had it fixed so it wouldn't work. He said it was too risky. I might go out and forget to lock the house. Quentin stepped into the hallway, and I heard him opening and closing the front door. You're right, Mrs. Platts, he said when he returned. Now tell me, are you absolutely sure no one had a key? Yes, sir. No one but me and Mr. Clark had a key. Quentin nodded, in acknowledgement of her statement. You mentioned you left your bedroom door open the night, mister. Clark was shot. Did you usually leave it open? No, I mostly keep it shut. But that night was different. It was all quite close. So, you just happened to leave it open. I suppose you could say that. If your door had been closed like usual, do you think you would have heard the shot? If I'd been awake, maybe, but not if I was asleep. These old houses have heavy doors, sir. And they're quite beautiful, Quentin remarked, admiring the imposing mahogany double door that led into the hall. You know, Leighton, what we call civilization is really just the ongoing destruction of everything beautiful and lasting, replaced by cheap imitations. You should read Oswald Spengler's The Decline of the West Asterisk. It's an incredibly insightful work. I often wonder why some enterprising publisher hasn't brought it to life in our own language. The entire history of this degenerate age we call modern civilization can be seen in our woodwork. Take that fine old door, for instance, with its beveled panels and ornate Bolection moulding, its Arnic pilasters and carved lintel. Now compare that with the flat, flimsy, machine-made panels that are churned out by the thousands today. Sic transit. I believe a part of that book has recently been translated into English. He studied the door for a time before turning abruptly back to Mrs. Platts, who was watching him with a mix of curiosity and growing unease. "What did Mr. Clark do with the box of jewels when he left for dinner?" he asked. "Nothing, sir," she replied nervously. "He left them on the table over there." "Did you see them after he left?" "Yes, I intended to put them away, but then I thought it would be best if I didn't touch them." "And no one came to the door or entered the house after Mr. Clark left?" "No, sir." "Are you absolutely sure?" "I'm certain, sir." Quentin stood up and started to pace the room. Suddenly, as he walked past her, he stopped and turned to face her directly. "Was your maiden name Bower, Mrs. Platts?" The very question she had been dreading had finally come. Her face drained of color, her eyes widened, and her lower lip quivered slightly. Quentin regarded her, not without sympathy. Before she could compose herself, he spoke. "I had the pleasure of meeting your charming daughter recently." "My daughter," the woman stammered. "Miss Bower, you know, the lovely young lady with the blonde hair, Mr. Clark's secretary." The woman straightened, her jaw tightening. "She is not my daughter." "Oh, come now, Mrs. Platts," Quentin admonished gently, as if addressing a child. "Why the silly pretense? You remember how anxious you were when I suggested you had a personal interest in the lady who visited Mr. Clark for tea. You seemed disturbed that I might think it was Miss Bower. But why would you be worried about her, Mrs. Platts? I'm sure she's a lovely girl. And really, you cannot blame her for preferring the name Bower over Platts. Platts generally means a place, and it can also refer to a crash or explosion. Sometimes it indicates a bun or a yeast cake. But Hoffman connotes a courtier, much more appealing than being a yeast cake, wouldn't you agree? He smiled warmly, and his demeanor seemed to soothe her. "It's not that, sir," she replied, her eyes pleading. "I made her take the name. In this country, any smart girl can become a lady if given a chance. And—" "I understand completely," Quentin interjected cheerfully. "Miss Bower is talented, and you were concerned that revealing your position as a housekeeper would hinder her success. So you stepped aside for her benefit. That was very generous of you. Does your daughter live on her own?" "Yes, sir, in Morningside Heights, but I see her every week." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Of course, as often as you can, I'm sure. Did you take the position as Mr. Clark's housekeeper because she was his secretary?" She looked up, bitterness reflected in her eyes. "Yes, sir, I did." She told me what kind of man he was. He often called her to the house in the evenings for extra work. "And you wanted to be here to keep her safe?" "Yes, sir, that was the reason." "What did you so anxious that morning after the murder when Mr. Leighton asked if Mr. Clark kept any firearms around the house?" The woman avoided his gaze. "I wasn't anxious." "Yes, you were, Mrs. Platts. Let me explain why. You were afraid we might suspect that Miss Bower shot him." "Oh, no, sir, I was," she exclaimed. "My girl wasn't even here that night. I swear it. She wasn't here." She was visibly shaken. The stress of the past week had finally caught up with her, and she looked around helplessly. "Come now, Mrs. Platts," Quentin said gently. "No one thinks for a second that Miss Bower had anything to do with Mr. Clark's death." The woman looked intently into his face. At first, she seemed reluctant to believe him. Fear had clearly been weighing on her mind, and it took him nearly 15 minutes to reassure her of the truth of his words. By the time we left the house, she seemed somewhat calmer. As we made our way to the Stuyvesant Club, Leighton stayed quiet, deep in thought. It was clear that the new information revealed in the interview with Mrs. Platts had greatly troubled him. Quentin sat back, smoking thoughtfully, glancing now and then at the buildings we drove past. We travelled east along 48th Lane, and when we reached the new Cornwall Bible Society house, he ordered the driver to stop, insisting that we appreciate its design. "Christianity," he remarked, "has almost justified itself through its architecture alone. With few exceptions, the only buildings in this city that aren't eyesores are the churches and their associated structures. The American aesthetic seems to be, whatever is big is beautiful. These depressing, monstrous blocks with rectangular windows, which they call skyscrapers, are admired simply because of their size. A box with 40 rows of holes is twice as beautiful as a box with 20. Simple as that, right? Look at that little 5-story building across the street. It's infinitely lovelier and more impressive than any skyscraper in the city." Quentin only mentioned the crime once during our ride to the club, and even then, it was only in passing. "You know, Leighton, kind hearts are worth more than crowns. I did a good deed today, and I feel positively virtuous. Frau Platts will sleep much better tonight. She's been terribly worried about little Gretchen. She's a tough old soul, very motherly. The thought of the future Lady Vere de Vere being suspected was too much for her. I wonder why she was so anxious." He shot Leighton a knowing look. No more was said until after dinner, which we enjoyed in the roof garden. We leaned back in our chairs, gazing out over the treetops of Madison Square. "Now, Leighton," Quentin said, "put aside your biases and think about the situation logically, as you lawyers like to say. First of all, we understand now why Mrs. Platts was so concerned when you asked about firearms and why she reacted to my mention of her connection to Clark's tea companion. So those two mysteries are resolved." "How did you find out about her connection to the girl?" Leighton asked, interrupting. "It was my observing that did the trick." Quentin gave him a disapproving look. "You remember how I observed the young lady when we first met, but I forgive you. Also, recall our chat about cranial differences. I noticed immediately that Miss Bower had all the physical traits of Clark's housekeeper. She had a broad skull, pronounced cheekbones, a straight jawline, a low, flat structure at the back of her head, and a medium-sized nose. Then I looked at her ears, having noted that Mrs. Platts had those pointed, lobeless ears, sometimes called satyr ears or Darwin ears. Those ears tend to run in families. When I saw that Miss Bower's were of a similar type, even if slightly different, I was fairly certain of the relationship. But there were other similarities, like their coloring and height. Both were quite tall, you know, and the core of each was significantly larger compared to the limbs, narrow shoulders, slender wrists and ankles, while the hips were quite robust. The fact that Bower was Platts's maiden name was merely speculation, but it didn't really matter. Quentin shifted to get more comfortable in his chair. "Now, let's discuss the facts of the case. Let us assume that just before 12:30 on the night of the 13th, the villain arrived at Clark's house, noticed the light in the living room, knocked on the window, and was immediately let in. What do you think these assumptions reveal about the visitor?" "Only that Clark knew him," Leighton replied. "But that doesn't really help us. We can't extend the suspicion to everyone the man was familiar with." "The clues suggest much more than that, my friend," Quentin countered. "They clearly indicate that Clark's murderer was someone very close to him, or at least someone he didn't feel the need to impress. The absence of the toupee, as I once pointed out to you, was crucial to the situation. A toupee is a must-have for every middle-aged gentleman struggling with baldness. You heard Mrs. Platts talk about it. Do you honestly believe that Clark, who concealed his baldness even from the grocer, would have been so careless in front of an acquaintance? And besides being bareheaded, he was missing several teeth. He also lacked a collar or tie, and was dressed in an old smoking jacket and bedroom slippers. Just imagine the sight, my dear fellow. A man doesn't look dashing without his collar, with his shirt front and gold stud on display. Dressed like that, he's no better than a lady in her curlers. How many men do you think Clark knew well enough to sit down with in such a casual state? 3 or 4, perhaps, Leighton replied, but I can't round them all up. I'm sure you'd do it if you could, but it's not necessary. Quentin picked another cigarette from his case and continued. There are other clues, you know. For example, the murderer was well aware of Clark's setup at home. He must have known that the housekeeper slept quite a distance from the living room and wouldn't be disturbed by a shot if her door was closed as usual. And he was likely aware that no one else was in the house at that hour. One more thing. Don't forget Clark would have recognized his voice. If there had been even a hint of uncertainty, Clark would not have let him in, especially with his natural fears concerning intruders and with the captain's threat hanging over him. That's a sound theory. What else do you have? The jewels, Leighton, those tokens of affection. Have you considered them? They were on the center table when Clark got home that night, and they were missing in the morning. It seems only logical that the murderer took them, doesn't it? And might they not have been one reason for the murderer's visit that night? If so, who among Clark's closest associates knew of their presence in the house, and who particularly wanted them? Exactly, Quentin, Leighton nodded slowly. You've hit the nail on the head. I've had a nagging suspicion about Brady all along. I was about to order his arrest today when Forrest brought word of Carter's confession. Then when that fell apart, my suspicions returned to him. I didn't say anything this afternoon because I wanted to see where your thoughts would lead. What you've been saying lines up perfectly with my own ideas. Brady's our man. He abruptly set the front legs of his chair down. And now, damn it, you've let him slip away from us. Don't worry, my friend, said Quentin. I suspect he's safe with Mrs. Brady. Anyway, your friend, Mr. Ben Hanlon, is quite skilled at tracking down fugitives. Let's give poor Leander a break for now. You don't need him tonight, and you won't want him tomorrow. Leighton turned around, surprised. What do you mean? I won't want him. Why, that? Well, Quentin replied lazily, he's not exactly the most charming or amiable person, is he? And he's hardly a visual delight. I wouldn't want him around me more than necessary, if you know what I mean. Besides, he's innocent. Leighton was too taken aback to feel annoyed. He scrutinized Quentin for a full minute. I don't understand you, he said. If you believe Brady's innocent, then who, for heaven's sake, do you think is guilty? Quentin glanced at his watch. Come to my place for breakfast tomorrow, and bring those alibis you asked Forrest for. Then I'll tell you who shot Clark. There was something in Quentin's tone that caught Leighton's attention. He realized Quentin wouldn't make such a specific promise unless he was sure he could keep it. He knew Quentin well enough not to gloss over or underestimate his words. Why not just tell me now? He asked. I'm terribly sorry, Quentin said, but I'm heading to the Philharmonic's special tonight. They're performing César Frank's D minor, and Stransky's temperament aligns perfectly with its emotional depth. You should join me, old chap. It's very soothing for the nerves and all. Not a chance, Leighton grumbled. What I really need is a brandy and soda. He walked with us to the taxi. Come by at 9 tomorrow, Quentin said, as we settled into our seats. Let the office wait a bit, and don't forget to call Forrest about those alibis. Just as we were about to pull away, he leaned out of the car. By the way, Leighton, how tall would you say Mrs. Platts is? Chapter 22. Quentin outlines a theory. Thursday, May 20, 9 a.m. Leighton arrived at Quentin's apartment right at 9 o'clock the next morning, his mood less than cheerful. Listen, Quentin, he said, settling into his seat at the table. I need to know what you meant by your parting words last night. Dig into your melon, my friend, Quentin replied, gesturing to the fruit. It hails from northern Brazil, and it's absolutely delightful. Just avoid ruining its flavor with pepper or salt. People can be quite ridiculous with flavoring, though nothing beats the absurdity of stuffing a melon with ice cream. Americans do the strangest things with ice cream. They put it on pie, mix it into soda, coat it in hard chocolate-like candy, shove it between cookies to make an ice cream sandwich, and sometimes even use it instead of whipped cream in a Charlotte Russe. "What I'd like to know is," Leighton began, but Quentin quickly interjected. "It's rather astonishing, the misconceptions people hold about melons. There are only two types, the muskmelon and the watermelon. All breakfast melons, such as cantaloupes, citrons, nutmegs, cassavas, and honeydews, are varieties of muskmelon. Yet folks seem to think that cantaloupe is a catch-all term. In Philadelphia, everyone calls every melon a cantaloupe, while this particular variety was first cultivated in Cantalupo, Italy." "Very fascinating," Leighton said, his impatience barely hidden. "But did you mean to imply with your comment last night? And after your melon, Curry has prepared a special dish just for you. It's my own culinary masterpiece, though I did have Curry's assistance, of course. I've spent months perfecting it, designing and refining it, if you will. I haven't named it yet. Perhaps you can suggest a suitable title. To create this dish, you start by chopping up a hard-boiled egg and mixing it with grated Port-du-Salut cheese, adding just a hint of tarragon. This mixture is then wrapped inside a fillet of white perch, much like a French pancake. It is wrapped in silk, coated in a specially prepared almond batter, and fried in sweet butter. That, of course, is just a simple overview of its creation, leaving out all the truly exquisite details." "It sounds delicious," Leighton replied, his voice lacking any excitement. "But I didn't come here for a cooking lesson." "You really underestimate the significance of what we consume," Quentin continued. "Eating is the one surefire indicator of a society's intellectual progress, as well as a clear reflection of an individual's character. The primitive cooked and ate like primitives. In humanity's early days, we suffered from a widespread epidemic of indigestion. Those nightmares of discomfort gave birth to our notions of devils, demons, and hell. But as people mastered the art of cooking, they became civilized, and when they reached the highest levels of culinary art, they also attained great cultural and intellectual heights. When the art of fine dining declined, so did mankind. The bland, standardized food in America shows just how far we've fallen. A perfectly blended soup, Leighton, is more elevating than Beethoven's C minor symphony." Leighton listened patiently to Quentin's chatter during breakfast. He attempted several times to steer the conversation towards the crime, but Quentin effortlessly sidestepped each attempt. It wasn't until Curry had cleared away the dishes that Quentin brought up the reason for Leighton's visit. "Did you bring the alibi reports?" was his first question. Leighton nodded. "And it took me 2 hours to track down Forrest after you left yesterday evening." "How unfortunate," Quentin remarked. He moved to the desk and retrieved a densely written double sheet of foolscap from one of the compartments. "I'd appreciate it if you could take a look at this and share your expert opinion," he said, handing the paper to Leighton. "I put it together last night after the concert." I later took possession of the document and filed it with my other notes and papers related to the Clark case. The following is an exact copy. Hypothesis: Mrs. Anna Platt shot and killed Julian Clark on the night of May 13th. She lived in the house and admitted that she was present when the shot was fired. She was alone in the house with Clark. All the windows were either barred or locked from the inside, and the front door was secured. There was no other way for anyone to enter. It was perfectly reasonable for her to be in the living room. She might have gone there to ask Clark a question about household matters. Standing directly in front of him wouldn't necessarily have made him look up, which explained his engrossed demeanor in his reading. Who else could have approached him so closely to shoot him without drawing his notice? He wouldn't have bothered about how he appeared in front of his housekeeper. He had grown used to being seen by her without his teeth or toupee, and in a state of relaxed disarray. Living in the house allowed her to pick the perfect moment for the crime. She waited up for him. Even though she denied it, he might have told her when he would be back. When he returned alone and changed into his smoking jacket, She realized he wasn't expecting any late guests. She picked a moment shortly after his arrival because it would suggest that he had brought someone home with him, and that this unknown person was the one who killed him. She used Clark's own gun. He undoubtedly had more than one. He would have been more likely to keep a gun in his bedroom than in the living room. Since a Smith & Wesson was found in the living room, it stood to reason that another gun could be in the bedroom. Being his housekeeper, she was aware of the gun upstairs. After he went down to the living room to read, she secured it and hid it beneath her apron. Following the shooting, she either disposed of the gun or stashed it away. She had the whole night to get rid of it, but she felt anxious when questioned about what firearms Clark had around the house, unsure if we were aware of the gun in the bedroom. Her motive for taking the position of housekeeper stemmed from her fear of Clark's behavior towards her daughter. She always paid attention when her daughter went to his house at night for work. Recently, she realized that Clark had inappropriate intentions and believed her daughter was in serious danger. A mother willing to sacrifice everything for her daughter's future as she was, wouldn't hesitate to kill to protect her. And then there were the jewels. She had them hidden, keeping them safe for her daughter. Would Clark have left them on the table? If he put them away, who else but her, familiar with the house and having ample time, could have found them? She lied about St. Clair coming by for tea, later explaining that she knew he couldn't have been involved in the crime. Was that intuition? No. She could be certain of St. Clair's innocence only because she herself was guilty. She was too motherly to want an innocent person to be suspected. She was visibly shaken yesterday when her daughter's name came up because she feared that revealing their relationship would expose her motive for shooting Clark. She admitted to hearing the shot, knowing that if she denied it, a test might reveal that a gunshot in the living room would have been loud enough for her to hear in her room, raising suspicion against her. When someone is awakened, do they really check the lights and note the exact time? And if she had heard what sounded like a gunshot in the house, wouldn't she have investigated or raised an alarm? During her first interview, it was clear she didn't like Clark. Her anxiety became evident every time she was questioned. She had the determined, shrewd demeanor typical of someone who could plan and execute such a crime. She stood about 5 feet, 10 inches tall, the exact height of the murderer. Leighton read this summary several times. He spent a full 15 minutes on it, and when he finished, he sat in silence for another 10 minutes. He got up and started pacing the room. Not exactly a fancy legal document, Quentin remarked, but I believe even a grand juror could grasp it. Of course, you can always reshape it, embellish it with countless hollow phrases and obscure legal jargon. Leighton didn't respond immediately. He paused by the French windows, gazing down at the street below, then said, "Yes, I think you've built a case here. Remarkable. I've been puzzled from the start by what you were getting at. Your questioning of Platts yesterday struck me as pointless. I must admit, it never occurred to me to suspect her. Clark must have given her a solid reason." He turned and walked slowly toward us, head down, hands clasped behind his back. "I don't like the thought of arresting her. It's strange I never associated her with this." He stopped in front of Quentin. "And you didn't think of her at first either, despite your claim that you knew who did it after just 5 minutes in Clark's house." Quentin smiled playfully and slouched in his chair. Leighton grew indignant. "Damn it, you told me the next day that no woman could have committed the crime, no matter what evidence was presented, and you lectured me about art and psychology and who knows what else." "Exactly," Quentin replied, still smiling. "No woman did it." "No woman did it." Leighton was clearly getting angrier. "Oh, certainly not." He gestured to the paper in Leighton's hand. "That's just a little trickery, you know. Poor old Mrs. Platts. She's as innocent as can be." Leighton tossed the paper onto the table and took a seat. I had never seen him so furious, but he managed to maintain his composure. "You see, my dear friend," Quentin explained in his unflappable tone, "I couldn't resist showing you just how utterly ridiculous your circumstantial and material evidence really is. I take a certain pride, you know, in my case against Mrs. Platts. I'm confident you could get a conviction based on it. But like the entirety of your lofty legal theory, it's fundamentally flawed and deceptive. Circumstantial evidence, Leighton, is the most absurd nonsense you can imagine. Its logic isn't too different from how we view democracy today. The idea is that if you gather enough ignorance at the polls, you'll somehow create intelligence, and circumstantial evidence operates on the same principle. If you have enough weak links, you forge a strong chain. Did you bring me here this morning just to lecture me on legal theories? Leighton asked coldly. Oh, not at all, Quentin replied cheerfully. But I need to prepare you for what I'm about to reveal. I don't have a shred of evidence or circumstantial proof against the guilty man. Yet, Leighton, I know he's guilty as surely as I know you're sitting there plotting how to torture and kill me without facing any consequences. If you have no evidence, how did you reach that conclusion? Leighton's voice dripped with hostility. Simply through psychological analysis, what we might call the science of personal possibilities. A person's psychological nature reveals itself clearly to those who can read it, much like Hester Prynne's Scarlet Letter. I've never actually read Hawthorne, by the way. I can't stand the New England temperament. Leighton clenched his jaw and shot Quentin a glacial glare. You expect me to walk into court, I suppose, leading your suspect by the arm and tell the judge, here's the man who shot Julian Clark. I have no evidence against him, but I want you to sentence him to death because my brilliant and insightful friend, Mr. Philo Quentin, the creator of Stuffed Perch, believes this man has a wicked nature. Quentin gave a slight, almost imperceptible shrug. I won't fall apart with sorrow if you don't even arrest the guilty man. But it seemed only humane to let you know who he was, if only to stop you from harassing all these innocent people. All right, tell me, and then let me get back to my work. Leighton no longer doubted that Quentin truly knew who had killed Clark. But it wasn't until much later that morning that he truly grasped why Quentin had kept him on edge for days. Once he realized the reason, he found it in himself to forgive Quentin, but in that moment he was filled with a fury he could barely contain. There are a couple of things I need to take care of before I can reveal the gentleman's identity, Quentin stated. First, let me take a look at those alibis. Leighton pulled a stack of typewritten pages from his pocket and handed them over. Quentin adjusted his monocle and scrutinized the documents carefully. After a moment, he stepped out of the room. I could hear him making a phone call. When he returned, he went over the reports again. One in particular caught his attention, and he seemed to ponder its implications. There's a possibility here, you know, he murmured quietly, gazing thoughtfully into the fireplace. He looked back at the report. I see that Colonel Driscoll, along with a Bronx alderman named Moriarty, attended the Midnight Follies at the Piccadilly Theatre on the night of the 13th, arriving just before 12 and staying for the entire show, which finished around 2:30 in the morning. Are you familiar with this particular alderman? Leighton's eyes shot up, locking onto Quentin's face. I've met Mr. Moriarty. What about him? There was a hint of excitement in his voice that I couldn't ignore. Where do Bronx aldermen hang out in the mornings? Quentin inquired. At home, I suppose, or possibly at the Somerset Club. Sometimes they have business at City Hall. Good heavens, such restless behavior for a politician. Would you mind checking if Mr. Moriarty is at home or at his club? If it's not too much trouble, I'd like to have a quick word with him. Leighton studied Quentin with an intense gaze. Then, without a word, he went to the telephone in the den. Mr. Moriarty had just returned home, about to head to City Hall. I asked him to swing by here on his way downtown, he announced. I really hope he doesn't let us down, Quentin sighed, but it's worth a shot. Are you crafting some kind of riddle? Leighton asked, though the question lacked any humor or good cheer. Honestly, I'm not trying to muddy the waters, Quentin replied. Just have a little faith, my friend. It's more valuable than any noble blood. I promise I'll identify the culprit before the morning's out. But you see, I need to be certain you'll accept whoever it is. These alibis, I trust, will be quite helpful in paving the way for my grand plan. An alibi, as I recently mentioned, is a tricky and dangerous thing, often subject to serious scrutiny. And the lack of an alibi tells us nothing at all. For instance, I see in the reports that Miss Bower has no alibi for the night of the 13th. She claims she went to a movie theatre and then home, but no one can confirm she was seen at any point. She was probably at her mother, until late. Doesn't that seem suspicious? Yet, even if she was, her only offence that night was a daughter's devotion. Conversely, there are several alibis here that, as they say, are rock solid, though that's a poor metaphor since even solid things can crumble, and I happen to know one of them is fake. So, do me a favor and be patient. It's crucial we examine these alibis in detail. 15 minutes later, Mr. Moriarty arrived. He was a serious, attractive young man in his late 20s, well-dressed, and nothing like what I'd imagined an alderman to be. His speech was clear and precise, with hardly a hint of the Bronx accent. Leighton introduced him and briefly explained the reason for his visit. "One of the guys from the Homicide Bureau was asking me about this just yesterday," Moriarty replied. "We have the report," said Quentin, "but it's rather vague. Can you tell us exactly what you did that night, after you met Colonel Driscoll?" "The Colonel invited me to dinner and the Follies. I met him at the Marseille around 10. We had dinner there and went to the Piccadilly just before midnight, where we stayed until about 2:30. I walked back to the Colonel's apartment with him, had a drink and a chat, then took the subway home around 3:30. You told the detective yesterday that you sat in a box at the theatre." "That's right. Did you and the Colonel stay in the box for the whole performance?" "No. After the first act, a friend of mine joined us in the box, and the Colonel excused himself to go to the restroom. After the second act, the Colonel and I stepped outside into the alleyway for a smoke." "What time do you think the first act ended?" "About 12:30, give or take." "And where exactly is this alleyway?" Quentin asked. "If I remember correctly, it runs along the side of the theatre to the street." "You're correct. And isn't there an exit door near the boxes that leads into the alleyway?" "There is. We used it that night." "How long was the Colonel gone after the first act?" "A few minutes. I can't say for certain." "Had he returned when the curtain went up for the second act?" Moriarty paused to think. "I don't believe he had. I think he came back a few minutes after the act started." "About 10 minutes. I couldn't say, definitely no more." "So, if we allow for a 10-minute intermission, the Colonel might have been gone for 20 minutes. "Yeah, that's possible." With that, the interview concluded, and as Moriarty left, Quentin leaned back in his chair and smoked thoughtfully. "Surprising luck," he mused. "The Piccadilly Theatre, you know, is practically just around the corner from Clark's place. You understand the implications here, right? The Colonel invites an alderman to the midnight follies and manages to get box seats close to an exit that opens into an alley. Just before 12:30, he slipped out of the box, made his way through the alley, stopped by Clark's, knocked, and was let in. He shot his target and hurried back to the theatre. 20 minutes would have been more than enough." Leighton straightened, but didn't say anything. "Now," Quentin went on, "let's examine the relevant circumstances and the supporting facts. Miss St. Clair told us that the Colonel had lost a significant amount in a game manipulated by Clark and had accused him of dishonesty. He hadn't spoken to Clark in a week, so it's evident there was tension between them. He spotted Miss St. Clair at the Marseille with Clark, and knowing she always returned home at midnight, he chose 12:30 as a suitable time, although he might have initially planned to wait until much later, perhaps 1:30 or 2, before sneaking out of the theatre. As an army officer, he would have carried a Colt .45, and he was likely a decent shot. He seemed eager for you to arrest someone. He didn't seem particular about who, and even called you to ask about it. He was one of the few people Clark would have let in, given his attire. He and Clark had been close for 15 years, and Mrs. Platts once saw Clark remove his wig and show it to him. Moreover, he would have known all about the domestic setup of the house. He must have spent the night there often while showing his old friend the nightlife of New Cornwall. What do you think of all that? Leighton had risen and was pacing the room, his eyes nearly shut. So that's why you took such an interest in the Colonel, asking around if anyone knew him and inviting him to lunch. What made you suspect he was guilty in the first place? Guilty, Quentin exclaimed. That lovable old fool guilty. Really, Leighton, that's absurd. I'm sure he went to the washroom that night just to comb his eyebrows and adjust his tie. Sitting in a box like that, the girls on stage could see him, you know. Leighton stopped suddenly. A flushed color crept into his cheeks, and his eyes blazed with anger. But before he could respond, Quentin continued, seemingly unfazed by his frustration. I had the most incredible luck today. Still, he's exactly the type of pompous fool who would run off to the washroom to fix himself up. I expected that, you know. Goodness. We've made remarkable progress this morning, despite your wounded pride. You now have 5 different individuals, any one of whom you could, with a bit of legal creativity, charge with the crime. At the very least, you could get indictments against them. He leaned back thoughtfully. First, there's Miss St. Clair. You were absolutely convinced she was the one who did it, and you told the Major you were ready to arrest her. My demonstration of the murderer's height could easily be dismissed in court as being too intelligent and conclusive to be valid. I'm sure the judge would agree. Secondly, let's consider Captain Carter. I had to physically stop you from dragging him off to jail. You had a solid case against him, not to mention his charming confession. If you ran into any trouble, he'd be more than willing to help you. He'd love to be convicted. Thirdly, I suggest Leander the Lovely. You had a stronger case against him than against most of the others. A perfect abundance of circumstantial evidence, really. Any jury would enjoy convicting him. I know I would, if only for his atrocious fashion sense. Fourth, I proudly highlight Mrs. Platts. Another solid circumstantial case, brimming with clues, inferences, and all the legal jargon. Lastly, I present the Colonel. I've just rehearsed your case against him, and I could embellish it quite movingly if given a bit more time. He paused and flashed Leighton a sardonic smile. Now note that each of these 5 meets the criteria for presumptive guilt. They all fit the legal standards regarding time, place, opportunity, means, motive, and behavior. The only catch, you see, is that all 5 are completely innocent. A rather troubling situation, wouldn't you agree? But here we are. If every person under the slightest suspicion turns out to be innocent, what then? It's frustrating, isn't it? He picked up the alibi reports. There's really nothing to do but keep investigating these alibis. I couldn't quite understand what he aimed to achieve with these seemingly unrelated tangents. Leighton looked just as puzzled, but neither of us doubted for a second that there was some sense behind his madness. Let's see, he said thoughtfully. The Major's alibi is next. How about we tackle it? It shouldn't take long. He lives nearby, and the whole alibi rests on the testimony of the night attendant at his apartment building. Come on, he stood up. How do you know the attendant is there now? Leighton protested. I called a little earlier and checked. But this is ridiculous. Quentin had taken hold of Leighton's arm, playfully pushing him toward the door. Oh, absolutely, he replied with a grin. But I've said many times, my dear friend, that you take life far too seriously. Leighton resisted, pulling away and trying to free his arm from Quentin's grasp. But Quentin was set on this, and after a bit of a heated back and forth, Leighton finally relented. I'm done with this nonsense, he grumbled as we stepped into a taxi. I'm already over it, Quentin replied. Chapter 23. Checking an alibi. Thursday, May 20, 10:30 a.m. The Chatham Arms, where Major Clark resided, was a small, exclusive bachelor apartment building located on 46th Lane, right between 5th and 6th Avenues. The entrance was set into a simple yet elegant facade, level with the street, and just 2 steps above the sidewalk. As you walked through the front door, you entered a narrow hallway with a small reception area like a cozy alcove on the left. At the back, an elevator could be seen, and next to it, Hidden beneath a narrow flight of iron stairs that wound around the elevator shaft was a telephone switchboard. When we arrived, 2 uniformed young men were on duty, one leaning casually against the door of the elevator while the other sat at the switchboard. Quentin paused, drawing Leighton near the entrance. One of those boys was on duty the night of the 13th, according to my phone call. Find out which one it is, and use your esteemed title as district attorney to get him to cooperate. After that, hand him over to me. Reluctantly, Leighton made his way down the hallway. After a brief exchange with the young men, he led one into the reception area and firmly laid out what he needed. The boy's name was Jack Prisco, from 621 Kelly Lane. Quentin began his questioning with the self-assured demeanor of someone who has complete confidence in another's precise recollection. What time did Major Clark return home the night his brother was shot? The boy's eyes widened. He came in around 11, right after the show let out, he replied, hesitating for only a moment. I've recorded the remainder of the questions and answers in a dialogue format for brevity. Quentin, he spoke to you, I take it. Boy, yes, sir. He mentioned he'd been to the theater and said how terrible the show was, and that he had a terrible headache. Quentin, how is it you recall so clearly what he said a week ago? Boy, well, his brother was murdered that night. Quentin, and the murder stirred up so much commotion that you naturally remembered everything about Major Clark during that time. Boy, yeah, he was the murdered man's brother. Quentin, when he came in that night, did he mention the date? Boy, not really, just that he figured his bad luck for choosing a lousy show was because it was the 13th. Quentin, did he say anything else? Boy, grinning, he said he'd make the 13th my lucky day and handed me all the change he had in his pocket, nickels, dimes, quarters, and 1 50-cent piece. Quentin, how much was that? Boy, $3.45. Quentin, then he went to his room. Boy, yes, sir, I took him up. He's on the 3rd floor. Quentin, did he go out again later? Boy, no, sir. Quentin, how do you know? Boy, I would have seen him. I was either at the switchboard or running the elevator all night. He couldn't have slipped out without my noticing. Quentin, were you the only one on duty? Boy, after 10 o'clock, there's only one of us. Quentin, and there's no other way for someone to leave the building except through the front door. Boy, no, sir. Quentin, when did you next see Major Clark? Boy, thinking for a moment, he rang for some cracked ice and I delivered it. Quentin, what time was that? Boy, well, I'm not sure. Wait, I remember. It was 12:30. Quentin, smiling slightly. Did he ask you the time? Boy, yes, sir, he did. He wanted me to check his clock in his parlor. Quentin, how did that come about? Boy, I brought up the ice and he was in bed. He asked me to put it in the pitcher in the parlor. While I was doing that, he called out for me to look at the clock on the mantel and tell him the time. He said his watch had stopped and he wanted to set it. Quentin, what did he say next? Boy, not much. He told me not to ring his bell, no matter who called. He said he wanted to sleep and didn't want to be disturbed. Quentin, was he firm about it? Boy, well, he meant it, that's for sure. Quentin, did he say anything else? Boy, no, he just said good night and turned off the light. Then I came downstairs. Quentin, which light did he turn off? Boy, the one in his bedroom. Quentin, could you see into his bedroom from the parlor? Boy, no, the bedroom's off the hall. Quentin, how could you tell the light was off then? Boy, the bedroom door was open, and the light was shining into the hall. Quentin, did you pass the bedroom door when you went out? Boy, of course, you have to. Quentin, and was the door still open? Boy, yes. Quentin, is that the only door to the bedroom? Boy, yes. Quentin, where was Major Clark when you entered the apartment? Boy, in bed. Quentin, how do you know that? Boy, somewhat offended. I saw him. Quentin, after a brief pause, you're absolutely sure he didn't come downstairs again? Boy, I told you I would have seen him if he did. Quentin, couldn't he have walked downstairs while you had the elevator up, without you noticing? Boy, sure, he could have. But I didn't take the elevator up after I brought the Major his cracked ice until around 2:30, when Mr. Montagu came in. Quentin, So you didn't take anyone up in the elevator between the time you brought Major Clark the ice and when Mr. Montagu arrived at 2:30? Boy, nobody at all. Quentin, and you stayed in the hall during that time? Boy, yes, I was sitting here the whole time. Quentin, so the last time you saw him was in bed at 12:30? Boy, yes, until early in the morning when some woman called him and said his brother had been murdered. He came down and left about 10 minutes later, probably Mrs. Platt's. Quentin handing the boy $1, that's it. But don't breathe a word about our being here, or you might find yourself in lockup. Got it? Now get back to work. When the boy had left, Quentin turned to Leighton with a look of urgency. Now, my friend, for the sake of society, the demands of justice, and the greatest good for the greatest number, I need you to put aside your better instincts, however you phrase it. To put it plainly, I want to search the Major's apartment right now. What for? Leighton exclaimed, clearly taken aback. Have you completely lost your mind? We can't ignore the boy's testimony. I may be a bit gullible, but I know when a witness like that is being honest. Of course he's being honest, Quentin replied calmly. That's exactly why I want to go in. Come on, Leighton. The Major isn't likely to come home unexpectedly at this hour. And he smiled sweetly. You promised to help me, remember? Leighton protested passionately, but Quentin was just as determined in his insistence. Soon enough, we found ourselves using a passkey to enter Major Clark's apartment. The only entrance was a door from the public hall that led into a narrow corridor, stretching straight ahead into the living room at the back. To the right of this corridor, close to the entry, was a door that led into the bedroom. Quentin walked directly into the living room. There, on the right wall, was a fireplace with a mantel displaying an old mahogany clock. In the far corner near the mantel stood a small table with a silver ice-water service that included a pitcher and 6 glasses. There's our handy clock, Quentin said, and there's the pitcher where the boy put the ice, imitation Sheffield plate. He walked to the window and looked down into the paved courtyard below, which was about 25 or 30 feet down. The Major definitely couldn't have escaped through this window, he noted. He paused for a moment, glancing into the corridor. If the door was open, the boy could have easily seen the light go out in the bedroom. The reflection on the glossy white wall of the hallway would have been striking. Then, retracing his steps, he entered the bedroom. It had a small canopied bed facing the door, and next to it stood a nightstand with an electric lamp. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he glanced around and switched the lamp on and off using the chain. Eventually, he fixed his gaze on Leighton. Did you see how the Major managed to slip out without the boy noticing? He asked. By levitation, I suppose, Leighton replied with a hint of sarcasm. That's basically what it seemed like, Quentin said. Extremely clever, too. Listen, Leighton. At 12:30, the Major rang for cracked ice. The boy brought it, and when he walked in, he peeked through the open door and saw the Major in bed. The Major told him to put the ice in the pitcher in the living room. The boy walked down the hallway and across the living room to the table in the corner. Then the Major called out for the boy to check the time on the clock on the mantel. The boy looked. It was 12:30. The Major told him not to disturb him again, wished him good night, turned off the light on the nightstand, jumped out of bed. He was dressed, of course, and quickly stepped out into the hall before the boy could finish delivering the ice and come back to the hallway. The Major dashed down the stairs and was on the street before the elevator even arrived. When the boy passed the bedroom door on his way out, he wouldn't have seen whether the Major was still in bed or not, even if he had looked, because the room was dark then. Clever, right? It could certainly have been done, Leighton admitted, but your elaborate scheme fails to explain his return. That was the easiest part. He probably waited in a doorway across the street for another tenant to come back. The boy mentioned that a Mr. Montagu returned around 2:30. Then the Major slipped in when he knew the elevator had reached the top and walked up the stairs. Leighton smiled patiently, but said nothing. You noticed, Quentin continued, The effort the Major made to establish the date and time, making sure the boy remembered it. A headache, unlucky day. But why unlucky? The 13th, of course. But lucky for the boy, a handful of silver coins. Quite the peculiar way to tip, don't you think? A dollar bill might have been overlooked. A shadow crossed Leighton's face, though his voice remained indulgently detached. I prefer your argument against Mrs. Platt's. Ah, but I'm not done. Quentin stood up. I hold out hope of finding the weapon, you know. Leighton now regarded him with a mix of amusement and disbelief. That would certainly be helpful. You genuinely expect to find it? Without the slightest difficulty, Quentin replied cheerfully as he approached the chiffonier and began opening the drawers. Our absent host didn't leave the pistol at Julian's house, and he was far too clever to dispose of it. As a major in the recent war, he would be expected to own such a weapon. In fact, many might have even known he had one. And if he is innocent, as he expects us to believe, why wouldn't it be in its usual spot? Its absence, you see, would be more incriminating than its presence. Moreover, there's a fascinating psychological aspect at play. An innocent person worried about being seen as guilty would have hidden it or thrown it away, like Captain Carter, for instance. But a guilty man, wanting to project an image of innocence, would place it back exactly where it was before the shooting. He was still rummaging through the chiffonier. Our only task now is to locate the Major's gun's customary hiding place. It's not in the chiffonier, he said, closing the last drawer. He opened a kit bag at the foot of the bed and sifted through its contents. Nor here, he murmured casually. The clothes closet is the only other likely spot. Crossing the room, he opened the closet door. He switched on the light at a leisurely pace. There, on the upper shelf, right in front of him, lay an army belt complete with a bulky holster. With great care, Quentin lifted it and set it down on the bed beside the window. There you are, old friend, he said cheerfully, leaning in to inspect it closely. Now take note that the entire belt and holster, except for the flap of the holster, are covered in dust. The flap, on the other hand, is fairly clean, indicating it has been opened not long ago. Not definitive, of course, but you do have a knack for clues, Leighton. He gently pulled the pistol from the holster. Also, notice that the gun itself is free of dust. I would say it has been cleaned recently. Next, he inserted a corner of his handkerchief into the barrel. Pulling it back out, he held it up for inspection. See this? Even the inside of the barrel is spotless, and I would bet all my saisons against a law degree that not a single cartridge is missing. He took out the magazine and poured the cartridges onto the nightstand, where they lined up neatly before us. There were 7 total, the full complement for that kind of weapon. Once again, Leighton, here is one of your cherished clues. Cartridges that sit in a magazine for a long time tend to become slightly tarnished, since the catch plate isn't airtight. But a fresh box of cartridges is tightly sealed, and they keep their shine much longer. He pointed to the first cartridge that had fallen out of the magazine. Notice this particular cartridge. The last one inserted is a bit shinier than the others. The implication is, you're quite good at picking up on implications, that it's a newer cartridge, placed in the magazine not too long ago. He locked eyes with Leighton. It was added to replace the one Captain Schmidt is holding on to. Leighton jerked his head up as if shaking off a spell of daze. He smiled, though it took a bit of effort. I still believe your case against Mrs. Platt's is your masterpiece. My painting of the Major is still just a rough sketch, Quentin replied. The finishing touches are yet to come. But first, a quick question. How did the Major know that Julian would be home at 12:30 on the night of the 13th? He overheard Julian invite Miss St. Clair to dinner. Remember how Miss Bower told us he was eavesdropping, and he also heard her say she would definitely leave by midnight. When I mentioned yesterday, after our visit with Miss St. Clair, that something she said would help us catch the culprit, I was referring to her comment about her usual departure time at midnight. This meant the Major could be sure Julian would be home around 12:30, and he likely knew no one else would be there. In any case, He could have waited for him, right? Could he have gotten a quick audience with his brother while he was unkempt? Absolutely. He tapped on the window. His voice was instantly recognized, and he was let in without delay. Julian didn't have any qualms about his appearance in front of his brother, and wouldn't have thought twice about letting him in without his teeth or toupee. Is the Major the right height? Yes, he is. I made sure to stand next to him in your office the other day, and he's nearly 5 feet, 10.5 inches tall. Leighton sat there, staring silently at the disassembled pistol. Quentin's tone had shifted from the way he had spoken while building his case against the others, and Leighton could feel the difference. Now let's discuss the jewels, Quentin continued. I once said that, when we uncovered the security for Brady's note, we would find the murderer. Back then, I suspected the Major had the jewels, and after Miss Bower informed us of his request for her not to mention the package, I became certain of it. Julian brought them home on the afternoon of the 13th, and the Major almost certainly knew that. I believe this fact played a role in his decision to end Julian's life that night. He wanted those trinkets, Leighton. He stood up with energy and walked over to the door. Now we just need to find them. The murderer took them when he left. There's no way they could have exited the house otherwise. So they must be somewhere in this apartment. If the Major had taken them to the office, someone would have noticed. And if he had put them in a safe deposit box, the bank clerk would likely remember that incident. Besides, the same thinking that applies to the gun applies to the jewels. The Major has acted under the assumption that he is innocent, and honestly, the trinkets are safer here than anywhere else. He would have time to get rid of them once the whole thing blew over. Come with me for a moment, Leighton. I know it's painful. Your heart can't handle any more distress. Leighton followed him down the hallway in a sort of daze. I felt a deep sympathy for him. It was clear that he realized Quentin was serious about proving the Major's guilt. I have often thought that Leighton suspected the true reason behind Quentin's request to look into the Major's alibi, and his reluctance was as much about fearing the outcome as it was about his frustration with Quentin's persistent methods. It's not that he would have ultimately shied away from the truth, despite his long friendship with Major Clark. Rather, he seemed to be grappling with the unstoppable nature of fate, hoping against hope that he had misinterpreted Quentin's intentions, and that by resisting at every turn, he might somehow reshape his destiny. Quentin led the way into the living room and spent several minutes examining the various pieces of furniture, while Leighton lingered in the doorway, watching him with half-closed eyes, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. We could, of course, hire an expert to comb through the apartment meticulously, Quentin remarked, but I doubt it's necessary. The Major is a bold and clever man. Just look at his broad forehead, the intense gaze of his round eyes, his straight posture, and that tight stomach. He's straightforward in all his thoughts, like Poe's Minister D. He wouldn't waste time hiding valuable items in some hidden corner. Besides, he had no real intention of hiding them at all. He simply wanted to stash them away where they wouldn't be discovered. That naturally brings to mind a lock and key, right? The bedroom had no such secure hiding spot, which is why I'm here. He walked over to a sturdy rosewood desk in the corner and tried each drawer, but they were all unlocked. Next, he checked the table drawer. That too was open. A small Spanish cabinet by the window was just as disappointing. Leighton, I absolutely must find a locked drawer, he said, surveying the room once more. Just as he was about to head back to the bedroom, his eyes landed on a Circassian walnut humidor, partially concealed by a stack of magazines on the lower shelf of the center table. He halted, quickly approached the box, and attempted to lift the lid. It was locked. Let's see, he murmured to himself. What does the Major smoke? Romeo y Julieta Perfeccionados, I think, but they're not valuable enough to keep under lock and key. He picked up a sturdy bronze paper knife, resting on the table, and wedged its point into the gap of the humidor just above the lock. You can't do that, Leighton exclaimed, a mix of anxiety and admonishment in his tone. Before he could reach Quentin, there was a sharp click, and the lid sprang open. Inside was a blue velvet jewelry case. Ah, dumb jewels more quick than words, Quentin said, stepping back. Leighton stood frozen, staring into the humidor with an expression of deep distress. Slowly, he turned and sank heavily into a chair. "Good God," he murmured. "I don't know what to think." "In that regard," Quentin replied, "you find yourself in the same frustrating position as all the philosophers. But you were quick enough to believe in the guilt of several innocent people, weren't you? Why should you recoil from the Major, who is indeed guilty?" His tone dripped with disdain, yet a strange, unreadable expression in his eyes contradicted his words. I recalled that despite the unbreakable bond between these two men, I had never heard even a hint of affection or compassion exchanged between them. Leighton was hunched forward, elbows resting on his knees, his head buried in his hands in a posture of despair. "But the motive," he insisted. "A man doesn't kill his brother for a handful of jewels." "Of course not," Quentin agreed. "Those jewels were merely an afterthought. There was a crucial motive, make no mistake about it. And I suspect that when you receive the report from the forensic accountant, much, if not most, of it will come to light. So that's why you wanted his books examined." Leighton rose, with determination. "Come on, I'm going to see this through." Quentin hesitated, his eyes fixed on a small, ornate candlestick of Eastern design on the mantel. "I say," he murmured, "that's a devilishly good replica." Chapter 24. The Arrest. Thursday, May 20, noon. As Leighton stepped out of the apartment, he took the pistol and the case of jewels with him. At the corner drugstore on 6th Avenue, he called Forrest, instructing him to meet him at the office right away and to bring Captain Schmidt along. He also contacted Stitt, the public accountant, asking him to come over as soon as possible. "You see, I trust," Quentin began, as we rode in the taxi toward the criminal courts building, "the clear advantage of my approach over yours. When you know from the start who committed the crime, you're not swayed by appearances. Without that knowledge, it's easy to be misled by a clever alibi, for instance. I asked you to gather the alibis because, knowing the Major was guilty, I figured he would have prepared an excellent one. But why gather all of them? And why spend time trying to debunk Colonel Driscoll's alibi? What chance would I have had of getting the Major's alibi if I hadn't slipped his name in with a bunch of others? And had I asked you to check the Major's alibi first, you'd have flat-out refused. I picked the Colonel's alibi to start with because it looked like it had a weak spot, and I was fortunate with that choice. I figured that if I could undermine one of the other alibis, you'd be more willing to help me examine the Major's. But if, as you claim, you knew right from the beginning that the Major was guilty, why in the world didn't you just tell me? It would have saved me a week of worry." "Don't be naive, my friend," Quentin replied. "If I had accused the Major right off the bat, you'd have had me arrested for defamation and libel. It was only by misleading you constantly about the Major's guilt and throwing up a whole school of red herrings that I got you to accept the truth even now. And yet, I never actually lied to you. I was constantly suggesting ideas and pointing out important facts, hoping you'd come to understand on your own. But you ignored my hints or twisted them in the most frustrating way." Leighton paused for a moment. "I get your point, but why did you keep setting up these false arguments only to tear them down?" "You were completely focused on circumstantial evidence," Quentin explained. "The only way I could get you to see that it led nowhere was by forcing the Major into the spotlight. There was no evidence against him, he made sure of that. No one even considered him a suspect. Fratricide has been thought of as unthinkable, a freak of nature, since Cain and Abel. Even with all my maneuvering, you resisted at every turn, objecting to one thing after another and doing everything you could to derail my efforts. Admit it, if it hadn't been for my persistence, the Major would never have been suspected." Leighton nodded slowly. "And yet, there are still things that puzzle me. For example, why was he so opposed to my arrest of the captain?" Quentin shook his head. "You're painfully obvious. Never try to commit a crime, my dear Leighton. You'd be caught instantly. Can't you see how much stronger the Major's position would be if he showed no interest in your arrests, as if he truly protested your decision to imprison someone, How else could he have so completely eliminated suspicion from himself? Besides, he knew very well that nothing he said would change your mind. You're so honorable, don't you know? But he did give me the impression once or twice that he thought Miss St. Clair was guilty. Ah, there you see a clever mind, seizing an opportunity. The Major definitely orchestrated the crime to shift suspicion onto the captain. Carter had publicly threatened his brother regarding Miss St. Clair, and the lady was about to dine alone with Julian. When Julian was found shot dead with an army colt that morning, who would be suspected other than the captain? The Major realized that the captain lived alone and would struggle to establish an alibi. Can you see how clever he was in suggesting Brady as a source of information? He knew that if you spoke to Brady, you'd hear about the threat. And let's not overlook that his mention of Brady seemed like an afterthought. He wanted to make it look casual, you see. An astute schemer, indeed. Leighton, lost in thought, was listening intently. Now, consider the opportunity he seized upon, Quentin continued. When you disrupted his plans by revealing you knew whom Julian had dinner with, and that you had nearly enough evidence to request an indictment, it piqued his interest. He understood that no charming lady could ever be convicted of murder in this chivalrous city, regardless of the evidence, and he had enough of a sporting instinct to prefer that no one actually faced punishment for the crime. Consequently, he was eager to switch your focus back to the lady. He played his hand skillfully, making it seem like he was reluctant to involve her. Is that why, when you wanted me to review his books and invite him to the office to discuss the confession, you suggested I imply that I had Miss St. Clair in mind? Exactly. And the person the Major was protecting was himself, but he wanted you to believe it was Miss St. Clair. If you were sure he was guilty, why did you bring Colonel Driscoll into the case? With the hope that he could provide us with the means to bring the Major down. I knew he was closely acquainted with Julian Clark and his entire circle, and I also understood that he was a busybody who might have caught wind of some animosity between the Clark boys and could suspect the truth. I wanted to get a better understanding of Brady, just to eliminate every possible counter-argument. But we already knew about Brady, Leighton replied. I don't mean material evidence. I needed to figure out Brady's character, his mindset, specifically his nature as a gambler. This was the work of a cold and calculating gambler. Only someone of that particular type could have pulled it off. Leighton didn't seem interested in Quentin's theories at that moment. Did you believe the Major? He asked, when he claimed his brother lied to him about the jewels in the safe. Julian likely never mentioned them to Anthony, Quentin said. I suspect he got his information from listening in during one of Brady's visits. And speaking of the Major's eavesdropping, that gave me an idea about a possible motive for the crime. I trust your man Stitt will shed some light on that. So, according to your theory, the crime was rather hastily planned, Leighton said, as if asking a question. The execution was rushed, Quentin corrected him. The Major had probably been thinking for a while about getting rid of his brother. He hadn't settled on how or when to do it. He might have gone through several plans before settling on this one. Then the opportunity arose. Everything aligned for him. He heard Miss St. Clair say she was going to dinner, so he realized Julian would likely be home alone at 12:30. If he got rid of him then, suspicion would fall on Captain Carter. He also saw Julian take the jewels home, another fortunate coincidence. The moment he had been waiting for had finally come. All that was left was to create an alibi and work out the details of how to carry it out. I've explained how he did that already. Leighton sat in thought for several minutes. Finally, he looked up. You've almost convinced me of his guilt, he admitted. But damn it, man. I have to prove it, but there isn't much solid legal evidence. Quentin shrugged just a little. I'm not interested in your ridiculous courts or your silly rules of evidence. But now that I've convinced you, you can't blame me for not meeting your challenge, you know. I suppose not, Leighton conceded with a hint of gloom. He slowly tightened the muscles around his mouth. You've done your part, Quentin. I will take it from here. When we arrived at the office, Forrest and Captain Schmidt were waiting, and Leighton greeted them in his usual composed, no-nonsense manner. By this point, he had regained his composure, approaching the task at hand with the serious determination that characterized him in all his responsibilities. "I believe we finally have the right suspect, Sergeant," he said. "Please sit down. I'll go over everything with you shortly. There are a few things I need to take care of first." He handed Major Clark's pistol to the firearms expert. "Take a look at this gun, Captain, and see if there's any way to identify it as the weapon that killed Clark." Schmidt moved slowly toward the window. He set the pistol on the sill, retrieved several tools from the pockets of his large coat, and laid them beside the gun. Then, adjusting a jeweler's magnifying glass to his eye, he began what seemed like an endless series of adjustments. He opened the stocks plates, pulled back the sear, and removed the firing pin. He took off the slide, unscrewed the link, and pulled out the recoil spring. I thought he might take the whole weapon apart, but it seemed he only wanted to let light into the barrel. Eventually, he held the gun up to the window, peering into the muzzle. For nearly 5 minutes, he looked into the barrel, moving it back and forth to catch the sunlight reflecting off different points inside. Finally, without a word, he carefully retraced his steps to reassemble the firearm. Then he trudged back to his chair, sitting and blinking slowly for a few moments. "I'll tell you," he said, leaning forward and looking at Leighton over the tops of his steel-rimmed glasses. "This might be the right gun. I can't say for certain. But when I saw the bullet the other morning, I noticed some unusual rifling marks on it, and the rifling in this gun seems to match those marks. I'm not entirely sure. I'd like to examine this barrel with my helixometer." A helixometer, as I later learned, is a device that allows for a detailed inspection of every part of a gun's barrel through a microscope. "But you're convinced it's the gun?" pressed Leighton. "I can't say for sure, but I lean toward that conclusion. I might be mistaken." "Very well, Captain. Take it with you and call me the moment you've examined it thoroughly." "It's definitely the gun," asserted Forrest after Schmidt had left. "I know that man. He wouldn't have made such claims unless he was fairly confident. Whose gun is it, sir?" "I'll share that with you shortly." Leighton was still grappling with the truth, holding back his declaration of the Major's guilt until every shred of doubt had been eliminated. "I need to hear from Stitt before I say anything. I sent him to review Clark and Clark's accounts. He should be here any moment." After a wait of about 15 minutes, during which Leighton tried to distract himself with other matters, Stitt entered. He greeted the district attorney and Forrest with a solemn good morning, then smiled when he spotted Quentin. "That was a solid lead you gave me. You had the information. If you could have kept Major Clark away a bit longer, I could have done more. He was watching me the whole time he was there." "I did the best I could," Quentin sighed. He turned to Leighton. "You know, I spent all of lunch yesterday trying to figure out how to get the Major out of his office while Mr. Stitt's investigation had unfolded, and once we heard about Carter's confession, I found the perfect reason to act. I wasn't keen on having the Major around. I simply wanted to give Mr. Stitt the freedom to work." "What did you discover?" Leighton asked the accountant. "Quite a bit," was the terse reply. He pulled out a sheet of paper from his pocket and laid it on the desk. "A brief report. I took Mr. Quentin's advice and examined the stock records and the cashier's collateral logs, tracing the transfer receipts. I didn't bother with the journal entries against the ledger and focused instead on the actions of the firm's leaders. I found that Major Clark has consistently used securities transferred to him as collateral for margin trading and has been steadily speculating with curb stocks. He's taken some significant losses. How much exactly, I can't say." "And what about Julian Clark?" Quentin inquired. "He was up to the same schemes, but he got lucky. He made quite a sum on a Columbus Motors pool a few weeks ago and has been stashing the money away in his safe, or at least that's what the secretary told me." "And if Major Clark has the key to that safe," Quentin suggested, "then it's fortunate for him that his brother was shot." "Fortunate," Stitt shot back. "It'll keep him out of state prison." After the accountant left, Leighton sat there like a statue, his gaze fixed on the wall across the room. Another thread he had clung to in his instinctive denial of the Major's guilt had been taken from him. The telephone rang. Slowly, he picked up the receiver, and as he listened, I saw a look of total resignation spread across his face. He slouched back in his chair, like a man utterly drained. "It was Schmidt," he said. "That was the right gun." He straightened up and turned to Forrest. "The gun's owner, Sergeant, was Major Clark." The detective whistled softly, his eyes widening in surprise. Yet gradually, his expression settled back into its usual stoicism. "Well, that doesn't surprise me at all," he said. Leighton called for Blake. "Get Major Clark on the line and let him know I'm about to make an arrest, and I need him here right away." His directive to Blake was understood by all of us, I think. Then Leighton gave Forrest a quick overview of the case against the Major. After he finished, he stood up and adjusted the chairs at the table in front of his desk. "When Major Clark arrives, Sergeant," he said, "I'll have him sit here." He pointed to a chair directly across from him. "You'll sit at his right, and you should bring Phelps, or one of the other men, if Phelps isn't available, to sit on his left. But don't make any move until I give the signal. Then you can arrest him." Once Forrest returned with Phelps, and they took their seats at the table, Quentin said, "I suggest you stay alert, Sergeant. The moment the Major realizes what's happening, he'll go after you with everything he's got." Forrest smiled dismissively. "This isn't the first person I've arrested, Mr. Quentin. Thanks for your concern. Besides, the Major isn't like that. He's too composed." "Do what you like," Quentin replied casually. "But I've given you a fair warning. The Major is cool under pressure. He takes risks and could lose everything without blinking. But when he finally feels trapped and faces certain defeat, all those repressed feelings he's held back will erupt. When a person lives without passions or emotions, there's bound to be a release eventually. Some people explode, and some choose to end it all. The principle is the same. It's a matter of psychological response. The Major isn't self-destructive. That's why I say he'll blow up." Forrest scoffed. "We might lack a bit of psychological insight down here," he shot back, "but we understand human nature pretty well." Quentin stifled a yawn and carelessly lit a cigarette. I noticed that he had pushed his chair back slightly from the table where we were sitting. "Well, Chief," Phelps rasped, "I guess your troubles are winding down, though I really thought that Guy Carter was your man. Who got the scoop on this Major Clark?" "Sergeant Forrest and the Homicide Bureau deserve all the credit for this," Leighton replied, adding, "I'm sorry, Phelps, but the district attorney's office and everyone involved will be completely left out of this." "Oh well, it's all just part of life," Phelps remarked philosophically. We lingered in tense silence until the Major arrived. Leighton smoked thoughtfully, glancing several times at the notes left by Stitt. Once, he got up to get a drink from the water cooler. Quentin opened a law book at random and chuckled at a bribery case decision by a judge from the West. Forrest and Phelps, accustomed to waiting, hardly moved. When Major Clark entered, Leighton greeted him with overly casual indifference, busying himself with some papers in a drawer to avoid shaking hands. Forrest, however, was almost cheerful. He pulled out the Major's chair and made a heavy comment about the weather. Quentin closed the law book and sat up straight, feet tucked back. Major Clark presented a dignified and cordial manner. He shot Leighton a quick look. If he had any suspicions, he didn't show it. "Major, I need you to answer a few questions. If you're willing," Leighton said, his voice low but resonant. "Anything at all," the Major replied easily. "You own an army pistol, correct?" "Yes, a Colt automatic," he said, raising an eyebrow in question. "When was the last time you cleaned and refilled it?" Not a single muscle on the Major's face shifted. "I can't quite recall," he said. "I've cleaned it several times. But it hasn't been restocked since I returned from overseas." "Have you lent it to anyone recently?" "Not that I remember." Leighton picked up Stitt's report and glanced at it for a moment. "How do you expect to satisfy your clients if they suddenly ask for their marginal securities. The Major curled his upper lip in contempt, revealing his teeth. So that's why, under the pretense of friendship, you sent someone to look over my accounts. I noticed a flush of red spreading up from the back of his neck to his ears. I assure you, I did not send him for that purpose. The accusation hit Leighton hard, but I did enter your apartment this morning. Are you a burglar now, too? The man's face turned crimson, and the veins bulged on his forehead. I found Mrs. Banning's jewels. How did they end up there, Major? It's none of your damn business how they got there, he replied, his voice icy and steady. Why did you tell Miss Bower not to mention them to me? That's none of your damn business, either. Is it any of my business, Leighton asked quietly, that the bullet that killed your brother was fired from your gun? The Major held his gaze, his mouth twisted into a sneer. That's the kind of treachery you play. Invite me here to arrest me, then ask me questions that could incriminate myself while I'm completely unaware of your suspicions. You're a real piece of work. Quentin leaned forward. You fool, his voice was low but sharp, cutting like a whip. Can't you see he's trying to help you by asking these questions out of one last desperate hope that you're innocent? The Major spun toward him, red-hot with anger. Stay out of this, you pathetic weakling. Oh, of course, murmured Quentin. And as for you, he jabbed a trembling finger at Leighton, you'll pay for this. A torrent of insults and curses erupted from him. His nostrils flared, his eyes ablaze. His rage seemed to go beyond reason. He was like someone in a violent fit, twisted, grotesque, and completely out of control. Leighton sat quietly, his head resting on his hands, eyes closed. After a while, as the Major's fury turned into incoherent mutterings, he looked up and nodded to Forrest. This was the sign the detective had been waiting for. But before Forrest could act, the Major jumped to his feet. In one quick motion, he spun around and landed a powerful punch to Forrest's face. The sergeant fell backward in his chair, landing on the floor, dazed. Phelps rushed forward, crouching low, but the Major's knee shot up hard and caught him in the stomach. He crumpled to the ground, groaning as he rolled in pain. The Major then shifted his gaze to Leighton, his eyes wild and maniacal, his lips pulled back in a sneer. His nostrils flared with each heavy breath. He hunched his shoulders, arms dangling away from his body, fingers stiff and clawed. He looked like a coiled spring ready to unleash chaos. You're next. His voice came out low and venomous, almost like a growl. He charged ahead. Quentin, who had been watching the scene unfold with a lazy demeanor, suddenly sprang into action. He rounded the end of the table swiftly, arms outstretched. With one hand he grabbed the Major's right wrist, and with the other he seized his elbow. In a quick pivot, he pulled back forcefully, twisting the Major's arm behind his back. A cry of pain escaped the Major as he slumped, momentarily subdued in Quentin's grip. By then, Forrest had regained his composure. He scrambled to his feet and stepped in, the sound of handcuffs clicking echoing in the tense room. The Major thudded heavily into a chair, shifting uncomfortably as he adjusted his position. It's nothing serious, Quentin reassured him. You've just strained the capsular ligament a bit. You'll be fine in a few days. Without saying a word, Forrest stepped forward and extended his hand to Quentin in a gesture of acknowledgement and respect. I had come to admire Forrest for it. Once he and his captive had departed, and Phelps had been settled into a comfortable chair, Leighton placed his hand on Quentin's arm. Let's take a break, he said. I'm worn out.